All right, we are live. Great day, Gadfly subscribers. It's Carlos, aka CJ. Hopefully, everyone's having a great day today. Today is Friday, April the 17th, and very excited today to be doing a Gadfly public live stream. So, again, if you're new to finding out about the Gadfly multi-channel network, please make sure to do us a favor. Go check out the gadfly.vhx.tv, where you can find out about our free 30-day trial and then the subscription-based system that's there. And you can also follow our work on a couple different social platforms. Now, you can also follow our work over on the Gadfly at the Gadfly MCN on Twitter. And we did create a Facebook page as well, just as we will begin releasing more content. And today I'm very excited to be joined by contributor London Paul. Paul is the host of the SiriusReport.com. That's his platform. And he also has a paid content there that he does daily podcast, releases those on numerous occasions, which I truly enjoy. And Paul's also very active on the Twitter platform, which is at the SiriusReport.com. Paul, great day. How are you, sir?
Yes, we're doing very well. And yourself?
Doing great. It's very, we continue just to go through the days, go through this time, and it's kind of interesting indeed to as we look at information, we assess, we share, but all in all, I can't complain. The family's healthy. I'm healthy, so I think that's a lot to be thankful for, Paul.
Yeah, exactly, and I think more than anything at this time, it is that hopefully, whether people agree with what's happening or don't agree with what's happening, it's a time to reflect upon, people's lives where they, yes, they're going to have more time to think about things, analyze things, understand things, and reflect upon the fact that, if you have neighbors, I know there's all this social distancing, and whether you agree with it or not is irrelevant. But if you have elderly neighbors who might be vulnerable or on their own, or might have difficulty doing things, and maybe it'd be a good idea just to check they're okay, and if you can help them in any way, even if it's very limited. I mean, I kind of went and did some shopping, which brought this home quite succinctly for me. Where I live there's a very high demographic of elderly people who are sort of 70s, 80s, 90s, and even older. And there was an old dear. She was probably, I reckon, about 90, and you could see she was eyeing the top shelf up of the supermarket, and you could see she couldn't reach it. And fortunately, I'm tall, so it's one of the banes of my life. Whenever I go in supermarkets, there's always someone asking me to get something off the top shelves, but that's fine. And I just said to her, look, do you need a hand? Do you want me to get something for you? And there was a few things. And she stepped back from her basket, and I put the stuff in the basket. And I said to her, look, how are you? And she said, well, I lived through the war with all the bombing. She goes, I think I can cope with this. And, it's moments like that when you need to appreciate what matters and what's important. And it's quite a sobering thing to see. I mean, I guess given her age, she clearly doesn't have anyone else to do things for her. Otherwise, someone else would have been doing the shopping. So therefore, we need to be appreciative of what actually matters. And it kind of got me thinking in a very broader sense about responsibility. And we've talked about this with regards to the old media and the mainstream media. And as much as we always decry the mainstream media, rightly, of course, for misrepresenting things, not reporting things, putting a slant on things that have no basis in reality. We also have to, going forward, have an extremely critical eye over the old media. And I include us in that piece. Please have a critical eye over what we're discussing and what we do. It's extremely important. I'm not, abdicating responsibility with regards to ourselves in that regard. But I think it's extremely important for the following reasons, because there are the camps out there who are feeding different narratives, and there's the Q narrative, which is all this positiveness that doesn't matter what's going to happen, it's all just going to work out swimmingly well, and yet nothing has ever happened. Dates come and go, and I'm sorry, but how do you attach any credibility to something that continually dates go by? It was Red October, it was Red August, it's, oh, this is going to happen, that's going to happen. It never happens. And then it's put off and with some other fanciful argument as to what is actually going to transpire. Well, it's up to people what they want to believe in, but that isn't coming out as reality in this world as we live in now. And then the flip side is we have all this idea that, that we're going to have a one world government. Well, I hate to have to point the obvious out, but to have a one world government, you have to have cooperation with nations like China and Russia, who have absolutely no intention of that. So let's just destroy that illusion. There'll never be a one world government. And then there's the idea there's going to be a global vaccine for this pandemic. Well, no, there isn't going to be a global vaccine because, again, China, Russia, and countless other nations are not going to agree to that. And also we extrapolate this further, and we're all going to. I've used this analogy of we're all going to be AI in hamster wheels. Well, that's not going to happen either. These are these extremes of views where one's this utopian world and one's this utterly dystopian vision of the future. Well, yeah, these theories have been doing the rounds longer than I can remember. I heard variants on the Q thing 25 years ago, and then it's a cyclical thing. And this dystopian view of the world has been doing the rounds longer than I care to remember. Neither of those is applicable. The reality is in the middle. We've been consistently saying this for as long as I've spoken about it privately and publicly. The world will have to go through this enormous paradigm shift. And I use the comment of a reboot of humanity, and someone on Twitter was a little bit perturbed. And upon reflection, maybe reboot of humanity when people think about AI is not a very good analogy. But the reboot is because everything is going to change in the most incredibly different ways to what these extremes imagine. The world is going to go through a change which is going to involve not just all the financial system and the geopolitical system, but it's got to be a reboot in how we all think and live our lives, how we regard our neighbors, what we regard as important. And in many senses, where we are now is a little bit of a kind of taste of where people are having to pause and reflect on things. And we have choices to make in this regard. We can sit there and imagine, that this was always a big plan. There was a great plan in the works where they were going to control the world this way. So, as I've said many times, if that were true, why is it they're destroying the one weapon they had, which was the dollar, to control everybody? You wouldn't do that. That's not a weapon of choice to control people when you destroy it in the process. So absolutely, that is not the case. The reality is that we have to reflect on where the world is going forward. What are the challenges that every nation is going to face because the entire fiat monetary system will disappear? What does that mean? And what are the challenges we face on a daily and monthly and yearly basis going forward? There's no magical solution to this. It will take considerable time and effort for all of humanity, but we need to get back to doing the things that matter most, which is being civilized to other people and other nations, to be civilized with our neighbors and accept the fact if we have different views, it's okay to have different views, but it doesn't mean you have to have this bitter hatred and detest an individual because they may have a different view on you politically. And okay, the whole political thing is going to never exist the way it does now. So the rebooting humanity is how we think about things, how we address things, how we live our lives, how our relationships are with each other. And we get back to doing the things that humanity should always have done. And we've gone so far the wrong way in terms of our lives, what we value as important now. Well, not everybody, but people have become very preoccupied with things that have no value to them. They've become materialistic. They've become obsessed with things that actually don't give them any quality of life whatsoever. So that's the reboot humanity's facing. And in a way, the virus is a precursor to that because it's making people, for the first time, have to think, okay, what are the consequences? Yeah, okay, if you want to dismiss the virus as being it's fake or it's overplayed, well, okay, if you want to do that, that's fine. That's your choice. but I think increasingly evidence proves the fact that we shouldn't be so dismissive. We have to be respectful of this. So if we have to make some sacrifices in the short term, which would be beneficial, because, by the way, they're not locking everybody down because they're going to turn us into the AI hamster wheel or Orwellian world like people believe. And this is the problem. If you believe in these things, you're going to see a very different version of the world unfolding now to the version of the reality of what's unfolding. Governments across this world have no control over what's happening. They are extremely fearful. They're not introducing lockdowns, which we can all disagree with or agree with. It doesn't matter. They're not doing it from a position of trying to control us and subjugate us. They're doing it from a position because they're extremely frightened of what the consequences will be. We've said this before, they've got the economic side where they don't know how to handle it. They don't know how to handle the fact of containing people. How are people going to respond? What's the risk of the spread of the virus? I mean, we nations like Sweden, people go, oh, look, well, they've got no lockdowns. Well, let's watch what happens to Sweden in the coming weeks and months, because we're already seeing an increase in the number of cases. We're starting to see an increase in the sharp increase in the number of deaths, although that's retrospective over a time period. But let's actually see what happens and not be so dismissive of the fact, oh, well, let's just open everything up, because that is a huge risk. And yeah, states in the US could do it, or nations can do it, but they're shooting blindly in the dark. They don't know what the consequences will be. And here's the problem. If you open everything up without any due consideration for what that might do, you could open up 20, 30, 40 Pandora's boxes, and when you can't put the lid back on very easily. So if you're going to open things up, you have to do what China's done. And I've said this before, people will hate me in some quarters for saying this, but 5G technology has been a huge benefit for them in handling huge amounts of data and crunching data to understand strategically how do you start to open a nation up. It doesn't mean it will ultimately be successful, but so far they're managing it quite well. They're getting a second wave, which they're coping with quite well. But it's a very, very necessary strategic step to take. And why did China do what they did? Because they must have seen things that initially, when they didn't know what the virus was. And here's the other point. Everyone's going, China reacted too slowly. Well, what were they supposed to do? They see something that initially you would have thought was pneumonia and gone, okay, it's probably related to flu. And then you start to see an increase in cases. So you then start to investigate. What were they supposed to do when they didn't know what it was? Tell the world there's going to be a future pandemic? Because if they'd done that and it hadn't happened, the world would have slaughtered them for doing that. So they're damned if they do and damned if they don't. And this is part of this thing. People need to let go of all this bitter hatred for other nations based on lies, propaganda, and speak. Just get over yourself. Start to go, these people are Chinese, these people are Russians, these people are Americans, these people are British. Let's start treating each other with civility and respect, and stop all this endless bullshit, which ultimately serves no purpose whatsoever, except feeds the cabal's desire to divide and conquer the planet. It won't succeed ultimately, but you're giving fuel to this by doing this. Just accept the fact, yeah, China might have made mistakes in some ways, but I'll tell you what, imagine if the pandemic had started in the US. Can you imagine how much worse it would have been potentially handled? Or maybe it wouldn't be, but don't be so critical of a nation and make accusations. Yeah, they did make mistakes, and I'm sure they'll acknowledge that. But at least now they've rectified those, and they're trying to help other nations in the process to deal with things. So these are important factors with regards to what's going on, and we just need to start treating this virus with a bit more respect and not being so flippant in, well, it's a pandemic. It's not really much of a problem. Well, here's the point. The virus hasn't ended yet. We can talk about this when it's over, and hopefully it will be over quickly, and minimal amount of people compared to where we are and will actually contract the virus and subsequently, pass away as a result of it. Hopefully that's the way we'll be talking about it. But for people to make these statements like, oh, it's a nothing, well, and comparing it to the flu virus, well, we haven't ended yet, the virus. This could go on. Hopefully it won't, but we don't know. We could be talking about this in 6 months' time. if we don't handle it correctly. And the other point is, we don't lock down the whole of the world practically to handle a flu virus. So these comparisons are ridiculous. But that's again is part of this confirmational bias where people just they don't want to be contained in the house. Yeah, I agree with that. I don't want to be particularly constrained to the extent we are, but we have to live with it. It's called being an adult and being mature about this, because this is a bigger problem people realize. And the fact is, people are going, well, there's not many numbers. Yeah, because everything's locked down. If we just unlock everything, you might be talking very differently. And I say to people out there who are very flippant about this, how will you feel if one of your family or friends contracts it and passes away? I bet you won't be quite so flippant about it then, as though it's a nothing and a non-issue. We have to take it seriously. This is extremely important. If we want to resolve problems in the world, then we have to have mature debates and not get sucked into extremes and ridiculous statements linking a virus with 5G. If you want to deal with 5G, deal with 5G, but don't link it to something that has no basis in reality. And it's the same if you want to have intelligent discussions with government in the future. We have to be responsible human beings to deal with this and not veer off on these ridiculous theories about what we imagine is happening, because that is not what is going to happen. The virus is, in a way, I've called it Mother Nature or nature. It's the most powerful force on earth, not the cabal. And I can guarantee in the coming years, in the next 2, 3, 4, 5 years, people will come look back and reflect on this time and say, that was the beginning, really, of the end of this insanity of the world we live in, and it's the birth of the new world. Yeah, there's all these developments going on, which is part of it. And it's extremely important now how we choose to deal with this. Are we going to get sucked into the fear game about all these horrendous things that are supposed to happen to us, which aren't going to happen to us? Or are we going to live in this idealized world that it's all going to be swimmingly great? And the US somehow, when it's crippled with debt, it's got enormous economic, social, political problems. But don't worry, it'll all disappear tomorrow because there's a wonderful plan waiting to be resolved. No. Every single person on this planet, whether they're 90 or 9 months old, in the future is going to have to play an important part to rebuild this world. We're having a great opportunity now where the virus has given everyone time to settle back, reflect on things, and do what's right. Because if we don't, the world when we go through all this change, it's going to take an awful lot longer. We need to take responsibility and start to do what we should have always done. And we have never had these problems. The reason we have these problems is because everyone gets sucked into all the nonsense that they fed us to divide and conquer us, and have forgotten, even in a very simple terms, that we have a neighbor who may need some help in some way. Or we have friends who actually would need some assistance in a way, rather than us having superficial friends and superficial relationships and connecting with an illusionary world and fighting to save it. Let's go move on to the real world in the future and build it. And all of us can contribute in this regard and make it a great world. And I don't doubt we'll get there eventually, but we can make it a lot easier for ourselves if we just start thinking a little bit more. And that's the other thing. Please, just people think. Don't just react to things. Don't react out of emotion and fear and lash out in situations. Just take a bit of time to reflect on what's going on and think, okay, maybe the world isn't unfolding the way I think it is. Maybe if you look at it in reality, what's actually going on with the virus, which was never planned, how nations are struggling. When you look at that, you get the path of least resistance. You don't have to come up with a convoluted theory to explain in this other idea of how things are unfolded, what's unfolding, because the more sort of conspiratorial or convoluted theories you have to put into that equation, you're going further and further away from reality. The path of least resistance shows governments are having to deal with something they've never had to deal with. We're having an economic collapse they can't deal with. And that's because everything, and we've said this thing, Trump had to take a wrecking ball to the cabal. Well, there's going to be a wrecking ball taken to everything, but it's how we move forward and adapt to that and change and quickly understand the severity of the problems we face. We have enormous challenges. I'm up for it. CJ's up for it, and countless other people out there are up for it. But the more people who are, the quicker we can resolve it. But just don't get sucked into all these people with their whatever belief system they want. There isn't a belief system with that. The only belief system is we return to being the human beings that we should always have been. And it's not difficult to do that. It's very, very simple. But stop engaging with Democrats and Republicans or conservatives and Labour. Stop aligning with people who are trying to profit out of fear. Fear is a very, very powerful, potent weapon that's been used against humanity for longer than we care to remember. We need to ditch all this, but I'm not being airy-fairy. I'm being very objective down the middle and saying we have enormous challenges, and they're huge. But if one person can do a great, great deed, imagine what 1,000 or 10,000 or 10 million. If we're all pulling in the same way, we can make incredible changes incredibly quickly. And you know what? At some point in the future, whatever happens with this virus, whatever happens economically, in the next few years, we're all going to turn around and go, I can't believe how we used to interact. I can't believe how we used to behave with each other. That's how big a fundamental reboot that is coming.
Paul, very, very well said. A lot to think through, and I completely agree. Being sensitive around those most at risk and looking for opportunities to help individuals. I think that's very important for us to all navigate and see through this. In my opinion, Paul, I think that part of the reason why the questioning of a lot of things has a lot to do with that government, media have not been good stewards of trust, of honesty. And I think in part, that's why we're seeing so many different discussions around what's evolving and what's transpiring and happening. And it's difficult sometimes to see through that. And, look at the most recent thing that government did, especially here in the United States, where they blindly pass a $2 trillion stimulus bill, and 1.85 trillion of it goes to the top 1% of the corporations. There was a Fortune article yesterday that through that downturn and through that stimulus, that the top 8 billionaires gained like $45 billion, and Americans are struggling, and they're not slowly receiving their tax checks, their stimulus checks. It went to the wrong accounts, and there's no one to contact. And so again, these things that are occurring, and it's difficult sometimes to see through that government always has our best interest in mind when they do those things, Paul.
Oh, let me. Yeah, we have to absolutely qualify this before people accuse me of, I don't support any government. I've never voted in political party. I have completely lack of faith in governments. But that's a separate equation from there's a nefarious plan with governments around the world to do things to us. You're absolutely right. But here's the point. If we want to make governments accountable, then, I've used the analogy with the US. Instead of people cheerleading wars overseas, I think increasingly less people are doing that. And all the trillions and trillions of dollars that have been wasted on pointless wars with horrific consequences, start to demand of your government, why aren't you spending this money on us, the people? Why aren't you spending $700 billion a year on improving the quality of life for all Americans? This is where people get sucked into all these polarized views. Yes, I agree. If you're going to it's very obvious that all this stimulus is more about bailing out corporations. It's about trying to save, a sinking ship. It's not going to work. It's not going to have any benefit. But yes, that is absolutely true, and I understand completely why there's utter distrust with governments. But I made a tweet, and it's a very telling statement that people in the US are largely very distrustful of federal government, with justifiably. But they then believe everything that same government tells them about China and Russia, as though, they're telling me the truth. So again, start to ask yourself, well, are they telling me the truth? Is there some spin and slant that you put on things? If I don't believe them domestically, they're going to lie to you internally. They're not going to tell you more truths externally. They'll lie even more because they don't have any accountability for their lies, because they're not accountable to the Chinese or the Russians. So they can be more outrageous what they say about that than what they do domestically. But that's the other problem, is there's not enough engagement with people to understand that, 2008 was the biggest theft of wealth in history of this planet. They don't understand that because they're not engaged. They for whatever reason. I mean, but then we have people who understand in part or to a lesser or larger extent how the world operates, but they're more interested in being entertained than informed. They'd rather hear some great story about something going on in the world or something that happened 20 years ago. And if you talk to them about reality, oh, that's boring, I'm not interested in that, that's dull. I mean, we had some people who subscribed to our podcast way at the start and go, oh, it's all very dry and dull, I'm not interested in this. So, I mean, this is the problem. People aren't interested in reality. They want some wonderful illusionary idea of what's happening or did happen or will happen. So that's a huge problem. But yes, distrusting government is totally understandable. But the problem is that therefore skews people's perspective of what's unfolding. And I'm not saying governments now are making the right decision, but what we're actually seeing with this whole, how they handle this whole virus, is how inept they are at doing things. Because the truth is, we don't have people in government who are capable of doing things even if they want to. Sometimes people think there's nefarious things going on when it's just their crass incompetence to know what to do. There isn't, they just are incapable of understanding what the needs are of people. Well, as things unfold and the whole Western economies collapse, which is inevitable at some point. I mean, there's some delusional idea that they think they're just going to turn the taps back on and everything will return to normal. Well, we know that's absolutely not going to happen. And that's where the fear comes in for them, because they're staring down all these barrels of guns of economic problems, social problems, and then they've got the virus. I mean, if we just have the collapse alone economically, that is bad enough. But when you factor in the virus on top, which they don't understand properly, they're still scratching around trying to understand what it is. I mean, we don't know about, I'm not trying to drive fear into people, because I'm trying to be as balanced about it. Most people recover fine. That's absolutely true. But, it's no respecter of age. I don't think they properly understand what it is. And I'm not talking about whether it's a bioweapon or anything like that, but what's the risk of mutations? They're already talking, well, we're not sure whether a vaccine would be even applicable, because if it mutates, the vaccine might not work with a mutation. There's a lot of actually very, very relevant science that people don't want to pay attention to, because they think all science is somehow tainted. Well, it isn't. Yes, there are aspects of it, absolutely. But that doesn't mean everything's wrong with it. And we have to be a little bit more sort of clever in how we assess things and not instantly dismiss everything as being a problem. It's like as soon as something happens, it's a gigantic conspiracy plot. No, it isn't. Sometimes things just happen. It's like we do have terrorist events where they go and bomb things. No, not every terrorist event is some false flag that there's all crisis actors and no one was actually killed. I mean, there was people telling me when they had the Manchester bombing, it never actually happened. Well, we know for a fact it did happen. We have personal people who told us of things that happened, who had family there. So we're not saying false flag things don't happen, but let's get some perspective and treat things in isolation. And before we jump to conclusions, say, okay, what is really going on here? Let's actually not build facts around what we believe it is immediately, because that's precisely what the cabal does to us. You think about 9/11. Within hours, they were feeding narratives to us. Well, why are we doing the same thing where we immediately latch onto a narrative, believe this is what's happening, and then ram all these square pegs into round holes to try and justify our thought process about this? We need to stop thinking like this. And yes, there are massive problems in the world. Yes, horrendous things have happened. Yes, governments have done treacherous things and lots of incompetent things. But it doesn't mean every single thing that happens subsequently fits into that. I think the biggest problem they have is they don't understand how to manage it. They can't manage anything economically. All the big sort of behemoth financial institutions, the World Bank doesn't know how to deal with this. The IMF doesn't know how to deal with this. Individual governments don't either. Central banks don't. There's no one out there because this is unprecedented. And they don't know how to handle the virus because the world's never been so interconnected. So they don't. So whilst yes, we want to get economies back online, that makes eminent sense. But there's this trade-off between, well, what are the consequences of that? And as I've said before, if you want to be, the arbiter of this, and you feel everyone should go back to work tomorrow, well, then you can take responsibility for the fact if it goes horribly wrong. I mean, and if someone has to make that decision, would you like to be the person who's remembered in history for causing a massive epidemic of enormous proportions potentially in your country and in a wider context? No one wants to do that. It's very easy to sit there in front of your keyboard shouting the odds about what should or shouldn't be done, but we have to be a little bit more clever as to how we understand this. So no, I'm no defender of governments. I've never liked them. But it doesn't mean that every single problem there's some plot behind it. And with the virus, there isn't. They're totally out their depth. They don't know how to deal with this in any way, shape, or form. All their actions prove this. So when they start coming out with comments like, well, I can't remember, someone made a statement. I'm not saying it was going to happen, but we're going to have to keep everything locked down until we've got a vaccine. People go, oh, well, that means there's some nefarious vaccine being planned for humanity. No, it doesn't. That's one person's reaction who's panic-stricken going, well, everyone could die. And if everyone dies or lots of people die in this country, then we're going to be in serious trouble. People are going to be furious with the government. They're going to be furious with me. I can't cope with this. Oh, okay, well, that's what I think should happen. And it's just a kind of reaction to something where if you're in a position of authority, people are now panicking. So sometimes we have to understand the difference between nefarious plans and just outright panicking of these people in government and positions of authority. And that's where they are now. There isn't a nefarious plan to do anything because there is no global world order anymore. It's totally fractured. I mean, not that I'm trying to plug our ebook, by the way, but which is now getting enormous and more, and the amount of stuff we've unearthed and context and stuff and historical context, you begin to realize that that's another thing, that a lot of what people perceive to be the world we live in based on what the old media is telling them is not actually what has happened in history and isn't actually what should shape our thoughts now. And we've knew a lot of stuff, but we've unearthed a lot of things that put things in a different context. So we have to be very careful that we're not just ending up repeating what started off as a theory a week ago or 10 years ago and is now become established fact in people's minds that it is true. So yeah, we have to, hold our governments accountable. But that's the other thing, people don't. They're quite happy if the problem's somewhere else in the world. But now the problem's at home, and now suddenly, I mean, when did we ever have a US administration who's having to deal with a virus, economic and social problems domestically? I can't remember. Well, there's never been that combination. Yeah, we had the Great Depression, all those, but that was a very different time. It was a very different era. We've never had a situation of this magnitude, and people really think they planned all this because they fully can understand how they can deal with 300 million people who might potentially, half of them might lose their jobs or end up in serious financial difficulty. And we're gonna keep them locked down for as long as it takes to develop a vaccine. Yeah, I can really see Americans being locked down for 12 months and agreeing to that. There's too many variables for them to try and plan something like this, and they've always done things in a covert way. They're not going to do something that overt because they're just going to wake the entire population up who's going to say, excuse me, we're not going to tolerate this. So that's another reason why this whole idea that they're going to do all these horrendous things to us is not a reality. I'm not doubting at one point in history, going back probably in the 60s or the 50s, they actually thought that, this one world governance was a reality. But we only have to look at modern history to realize that's never going to happen. It's not a possibility, and it never, in reality, ever was going to be.
Yeah, Paul, you said some really great things there, and I think it's important to understand the science, if you will, of disinformation. And I think in today's stage of anxiety, of stress, people are looking for clarity right now through this. But there's also good and bad actors. I say this all the time, regardless of profession, regardless of organizations. There's if we lived in a perfect society, wouldn't necessarily have to worry about that. But there is disinformation that's occurring. And a perfect example that I was going to put it in a separate podcast, but it's like a 1 minute thing. So I'm like, wait a minute, I'm not going to get on a podcast to speak. But a perfect example of that was a recent ploy by an organization, and this will be brief, I promise, that pushed out a fake website that had all the looks, the appeal, and everything of a G20 press release. And the organization behind this, they had the page up, but it's taken down now. This had thousands of views, millions of shares, and they were stating that the G20 has decided a debt jubilee for several nations, and a lot of people fell for that. It was shared, and it hit my feed by a close friend. And after I clicked on the website and did a little bit of research, I'm like, wait a minute, some of these links aren't broken. The page just doesn't feel right. And sure enough, it was a clone site and put out by this organization just for the purpose of sharing that. So we have to just be very mindful of that right now that's occurring, the attempt to control the narrative. And in regards to the 5G, I agree with I didn't take this opinion for myself. I took it from another media type personality that stated it kind of ruins the argument, because when you put out so many different conspiracies around it, then it kind of ends the argument to do any type of legitimate research. If in terms of the health impact, by pushing this out, it pushes people away from it. So we just have to be mindful of that. And it's just so important right now as people are trying to get a little bit of clarity through the chaos that we're going through.
Yeah, exactly. You make extremely important and valid points. I mean, yeah, the fake site, it was supposed to be purporting to be an IMF site. I mean, but someone sent me the link going, oh, well, this is amazing. And I immediately messaged them back going, well, that's not the IMF site. They went, oh, because this is, again, it's attention to detail. The first thing when someone sends me anything that sounds, is really quite sensational, I always immediately look at the website address and go, okay, does this correlate with the IMF website? No, it doesn't. Therefore, I'm not interested in it. But that's what I'm saying. But this is the problem. Again, people latched onto it because they all think there's going to be, debt jubilee. It's all part of this of a belief that these things are going to happen. They're going to cancel all the debt across the world. So as soon as they see that, they go, oh, wow, this is great. And it'll go viral across the world, effectively. But that's because it's a belief, because it's like, wow, I'm seeing something that confirms what I believe. Oh, therefore they latch onto it. But that, each to their own. But my first instinct, I mean, I get sent huge amounts of things about where I get told these things are going to happen, or my immediate instinct is, okay, I need to go away and think about this. And 9 times out of 10, they prove to be incorrect because it falls very, very quickly. So yes, I understand people's desire to want to believe in things, but we're not in the belief mechanism world. We need to be in the world that's just deals with the brutal reality of things. And if that isn't what we like to see or agree with, well, sorry, that's how we're going to have to be in future. I'm quite happy to ditch anything if someone comes along with and says, look, we've looked at this, we've unearthed this, and this gives, categorical evidence, proof of it, I'll just go, right, fine, I'll just dump what I thought. Because at the end of the day, I want to know what's the truth and reality of things. That's the only thing that matters to what we do. And therefore, it's not about holding on to anything. I have no desire to hold on to any belief system, any idea that one nation's better than the other, or anything like that. What I did, when I first said about all the big changes that were coming, and back in 2013, I said, if people want to really understand the future and get an idea of what's coming, just study China and Russia. And when I mean study it properly, not what people are told. Go away and if you get the opportunity and you can, go and spend time in the country. Immerse yourself in the culture, how the people behave and operate, and what they're doing. Pay close attention. If people had actually done that in the last 7 years, they get a very good understanding of what's unfolding. Not in a dictatorial way, as some people are fearful of. That's not what's going to happen. But it's a kind of blueprint and an idea of where the world is going and how we should start to operate in this multipolar world rather than a unipolar hegemony, which the US has very regrettably, imparted or tried to on the rest of the world. And so this is an extremely important distinction between, again, as what is happening in reality and what is illusional. And you need to just fact check everything. And I said on Twitter, people are going to have to reconsider, you've been following individuals or groups or whoever it is, start to really critically analyze everything they're saying. Reflect back on things they told you might have happened in the past or were going to happen and subsequently didn't. Or they told you a bunch of things and they did happen. We're in the game of understanding facts, as dull and dry as they may be. And that's the basis for judging anybody, surely. Otherwise, we could have just set up the Gadfly, come out without whatever we say, whatever we thought would sell subscriptions and get us notoriety and all those things. But that's not what we do, and we've got no intention of ever doing that. Well, I think now more than ever, given what's unfolding in the world, people need to look for not just us, and maybe if you don't like us, go and find someone else you do like. But look for people who are telling you what is unfolding, what is reality, and not trying to shape a narrative that you may feel appeals to you. Never look for narratives that appeal to what you want to believe, because at the end of the day, they more often than not take you down blind alleys, and at some point you are going to be extremely disappointed when things don't turn out. And that's the other thing. If you latch onto a belief system and it doesn't transpire, you're going to be extremely deflated and you're not going to feel particularly engaged with what's unfolding. So it's important that we engage with what's unfolding and start to shape the alternative media in a positive way. And, if people are concerned about 5G, and I perfectly understand why, then let's have some sensible discourse on it. Let's get a global perspective on this and start to ask intelligent questions about it and get answers. And not when we get answers because we don't like them, dismiss them. If we think the answers aren't, appropriate or don't deal with things in the way we think they should, then we can, challenge them and say, okay, well, I don't agree with this for this reason. And that's how we're going to change things. But we're not going to change things by just, saying, I don't like something. I have people getting in touch saying to me, well, they need to prove something isn't something. When I say the virus isn't a bioweapon, we'll prove it isn't. No, you're the one making the statement. You prove it is. That's how the world works. It doesn't. You can't. It's like going into a court of law and saying, "Well, excuse me, you have to prove you didn't murder someone." No, you have to prove I did murder someone. That's an extremely different perspective, but it's extremely important we start to think like that. And then we will get to the bottom of understanding things. And if we want to shape governments, we have to be mature. We have to have a collective maturity to challenge things. And at the moment, I don't see enough of that collective maturity in how we handle things. And therefore, we won't get any engagement with them. I'm seeing slight evidence with governments in the UK now where they're starting to want to engage with people and say, okay, what do you think we should be doing? Now, we could say they're just paying lip service, and maybe to some extent they are. But from what I understand, that is not the case. They're now starting. So let's use these platforms constructively. Let's engage with people who are on social media in these positions. Ask intelligent questions. Don't just go on and start ripping them to pieces without anything of substance, because your moment's gone. They will never engage with you again. So that's my perspective. I think there is an opportunity now with what's unfolding to start to get that level of engagement going. Let's not miss, as awful as what is unfolding is, there are ways we can use this to our advantage. So if we want this engagement, let's do it intelligently. And I'm pretty sure there's many, 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 many people out there who can do this. But they need to just think a little bit more rather than jumping in with 2 feet first and venting their frustration, which is understandable, their anger, yes, it's understandable, their resentment, yes, it's understandable, their fear, yes, but that's not going to get us that engagement that we want.
Yeah, absolutely. Very well said. Paul, we'll close with this. What do you perceive, or what do you think the new normal will look like? And is there a battle to control that narrative occurring right now?
Well, I mean, the problem is we're kind of in this hiatus at the moment between the old world, as it were, or the old sort of paradigm just collapsing in totality. And there are a lot of signals, and we've discussed this. I've done it in all the podcasts. I said the other day, we've spent the last 3.5 years trying to highlight all the things that matter now in the present. I mean, yes, some events are happening now as well. The website's the same. Well, all the articles were put out there to give people indication of the future and what was coming. And so we're kind of stuck in the middle of moving towards where we're going and where the world is crumbling and failing. So the problem with the new normal is that at the moment nothing's normal. It's completely abnormal, and really until we get through, well, the virus and all the consequences that surround it, we're going to be in this period of instability, of uncertainty, which is going to fuel people's fear. Undoubtedly, I don't dispute that. So the normality is when we get over all these initial challenges, however long that takes, and then when everything has been effectively destroyed in terms of this world, because financially, that doesn't mean, when I say destruction, I have to be a bit careful. I'm not saying it means the obliteration of the world. It doesn't. It just means an obliteration of the financial system and everything that's underpin it. But once we get through the other side, then the new normal starts to unfold as to, okay, how's the new world going to be? What's going to be very different from what it is now? And to be honest, I did a podcast, which was actually podcast number 400. So it's quite a long time ago, because we're now up to nearly 900. And I laid out what was believed to be the future. And maybe what I'll do is next time we do something, because I always just create bullet point notes. So I've still got the bullet point notes for it. Maybe I'll dig them out and we can talk through those points and give some indication of how it's perceived to be. But society will change. We're going to have new technology, and the world of work will never be quite the same again, because, with all due respect, a lot of jobs people do now probably in the future won't have any relevance. We won't have any need for them. So that's one thing. I mean, how do nations interact in the future? What's going to happen to our financial system? What are the changes? What's going to happen differently? Are we going to start to have more community-based feeling to things? As states, in the US, going to have even more autonomy now, and to be able to have a lot more self-determination as to how they do things and how we show things. So there is an enormous amount of change. So at the moment, we're just in this hiatus. We're not anywhere near the new normal. The new normal's as long as it takes for the virus to play out, the financial system to implode in totality. And it's then the new normal starts when we come out the other side. But of course, there are elements to the new normal that are unfolding now in these very dull, dry, boring things that people aren't interested in, but they should be interested in. And that's what we try to unearth all the time, is the important little statements, important little bits of things that we become aware of that are starting to shape the future. Because we're not going to have a sort of situation where everything's raised to the ground and we all stand there for a year or two trying to work out what's going to be done. It's not like that, but equally, it's not like it's not like a kind of, we just open a drawer, pull out a whole new world and start running with it, because that's not going to happen either. But so it's an organic process, and that's the other thing. We need to start to change our attitude, because we can't roll something out if we don't have people pulling in the same direction and letting go of all the things that have divided us for far too long. And because we're all going to have to pull the same way. I mean, it's a bit like, it's not a great analogy, but during the war in the UK, people forgot their political differences, although it wasn't the same as it is now. They forgot that they had disagreements with people, and everyone started to build communities. I mean, my parents were very young, during the war. My dad was born just before the war. My mum was born during the war. But even as very young, they remember certain things, and we talked about it quite a lot. And they talked about how there was a real community feel, and there was a lot of shortage of food, and people would collect it. I mean, my mum lived in a very small close with very few houses. Everyone would pool their food, make big stews, and everyone go, right, the children get the food first, and the adults will get whatever's left. And it was that kind of way of dealing with adversity. And I'm not saying we have to go to that extreme, but that's the kind of way we're going to have to start thinking if we're going to approach the future and be able to navigate where we're going. But if we keep shutting our doors and isolating ourselves from people, then when these big changes come, we're still going to have to do this, but it's going to be incredibly hard. So now, really, I feel this virus is kind of doing that with people. You're seeing people being a bit more, interacting with their neighbours and trying to be helpful and sort of respectful. I'm not saying that where I live people are disrespectful or not, but you're seeing little things that give me encouragement. And and it's the old analogy from acorns, oak trees are grown, and that's what we need to do. We need to be planting all these acorns and tending these oak trees so they grow and flourish into the wonderful tree that they eventually will be. And we need to be planting those all over the world, in all our nations, and tending to them, and not waiting till everything's gone and then going, oh, heck, what am I going to do now? Because actually the problem, if we do that and leave it till then, is people are going to be so upset, angry, frustrated, fearful. They're going to shut themselves away even more, if that's possible, than they in those situations, because that's what people's natural, defense mechanism is, to withdraw and retreat into themselves. So now's the opportunity. And maybe this is a little bit too out there, but sometimes nature is this powerful force on earth, and nature's given us an opportunity. I feel, is given what's happening, it's because it isn't man-made. Okay, will people disagree? Fine, disagree. But if it's natural, and therefore it's given us an opportunity to start to sow some seeds, or these acorns, and start to tend and start to build those processes we need to do going forward, when we're all going to have to roll up our sleeves and work harder than we've ever worked in our lives. And maybe for quite a lot of us, we'll be working really hard for our children and grandchildren and great grandchildren in the future. But we're here now, and that's, you know, the role we're going to play. And maybe a lot of us won't necessarily reap all the benefits of what's to come, but that's what we have to do. I mean, you know, throughout history, sometimes, you know, people in certain eras have to make a lot of selfless acts for the benefit of others in the future. And if that's what we have to do, then so be it.
Very well said, Paul. Paul, thank you so much for a great conversation today. And for our Gadfly subscribers, thank you so much for supporting our multi-channel network. If this is your first time tuning in and hearing a Gadfly contributor or a discussion, one of our live streams, please consider jumping over and subscribing to the Gadfly multi-channel network. And please also go check out Paul's work over at thesiriusreport.com and follow him on his Twitter as well. So, Paul, thank you so much, and we will be back soon.
Yes, and thank you. And, you know, thank you to everyone listening and to all the people who support us and subscribe to us. We really appreciate it. And without you, as we've said many times, we'd just be a self-indulgent talking shop, which is pointless.
Exactly.